that's kind of blurred the line between archaeology and a ghost story, between ancient history and a modern horror movie. It's a tale of incredible discovery, sudden death, and what looks a lot like a long-dead king's revenge. So today, we're going to unseal the truth behind the curse of King Tutankhamun.
Picture this, it's 1923. We're in Cairo, at the fancy Continental Hotel. A wealthy British aristocrat, Lord Carnarvon, is lying on his deathbed. He's shaking with a fever, fighting for every single breath. Then, at exactly 1:55 in the morning, he's gone. But this is just where our story begins. Because, you see, just a few months before this, Lord Carnarvon had paid for the expedition that opened a 3,000-year-old tomb. And according to the newspapers, this exact warning was inscribed at the entrance. It was a message from the ancient past, and it really looked like the Pharaoh was about to collect on his promise.
And get this, in the 6 years right after that tomb was opened, at least 22 people connected to the discovery died under mysterious circumstances. 22! So was it just a crazy coincidence, a string of terrible luck, or was it the swift wings of a pharaoh's curse?
Okay, so to really get how this legend just grabbed the world by the throat, we've got to go back to the exact moment Lord Carnarvon died, because it was right there that a whole series of bizarre events happened that made the curse feel terrifyingly real.
I mean, just think about how fast this all went down. In just a few months, the greatest archaeological find in history, it turns into this huge tragedy. It all started with something so small, a simple insect bite, a nick from a razor while he was shaving, and then suddenly, the man who funded the entire thing was dead.
And this, right here, is where the story gets really, really weird. At the exact moment he died, boom! The entire city of Cairo is plunged into darkness. Thousands of miles away back in England, his dog Susie reportedly howls and just drops dead. A novelist had publicly predicted his doom. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the guy who created the super-logical Sherlock Holmes, believed it was some kind of supernatural evil elemental. So you can see why the media just went absolutely wild with this.
So Lord Carnarvon's death? That was just the opening act. The newspapers started connecting every single death. It didn't matter how unrelated it seemed, right back to that tomb. And the body count? Well, it just started climbing. And the legend grew right along with it.
The headlines were just relentless. You had this American financier, he visits the tomb, and then he dies of a fever the very next day. Another industrialist sees the tomb, dies of a fever. The radiologist who x-rayed the mummy? Dead, suddenly. And the irony is, the journalist who did the most to hype up the curse story, he ends up dying from a fever too, becoming one of its so-called victims. It's crazy. And the most heartbreaking part? Carter's secretary, and then his father, who actually took his own life out of grief.
And then came the smoking gun. The thing that seemed to prove it all. When they finally did an autopsy on King Tut's mummy, what did they find? A lesion on its left cheek, in the exact same spot as the insect bite that killed Lord Carnarvon. A 3,000-year-old death mark. For pretty much everyone, that was it. Case closed. The curse was 100% real.
I mean, it's an amazing story, right? It's terrifying, but what if that's all it is? A story? What if the real truth is actually way more interesting than the myth? To find out, we gotta look past the curse and at the boy behind the gold mask.
You see, before he became this worldwide celebrity, Tutankhamun was basically one of Egypt's most forgotten pharaohs. And the reason why tells us a whole lot. His life wasn't about power and glory. It was about pain and fragility. And it all started with his parents.
Okay, so to keep the royal bloodline pure, Egyptian pharaohs would often marry their own family members. And in Tut's case, his parents were full-on brother and sister. And generations of this practice, well, it had some pretty devastating consequences for their kids.
So the mighty Pharaoh from the stories, the reality was he was a really frail young man. He had a clubfoot that was so bad he needed one of the 130 canes they found in his tomb just to get around. On top of that, he had a painful bone disease and malaria. He died when he was just a teenager and was considered so unimportant that later pharaohs literally chiseled his name off of monuments. And ironically, that's exactly why his tomb was left alone for 3,000 years.
All right, so now that we've met the real person, let's circle back to the myth. It's time to bring in a little science, a little logic, and start picking this curse apart, piece by piece, starting with the very thing that kicked it all off.
Okay, this is the bombshell. That terrifying warning. Death shall come on swift wings. The quote that started this entire legend? It never existed. It was completely made up. Archaeologists have confirmed it. There was no cursed clay tablet, no inscription like that anywhere in the tomb.
Period.
So how in the world did the most... Almost funny how simple it was. Years later, the security chief from the dig fessed up. A reporter just kept bugging him, asking about curses. The chief told him, nope, haven't found any, but he kind of gave a little smirk. That's it. That's all the reporter needed. He just ran with it, invented the whole story about a cursed clay tablet, and poof, a global legend was born from a misunderstood smile.
Okay, but what about all those deaths? Well, back in 2002, the British Medical Journal decided to actually put the curse to the test. They tracked down the people who were there when the tomb was opened and looked at how long they lived. And the result? The so-called cursed group had an average age of death of 73, which was actually a little bit longer than what you'd expect for people of their status back then.
And all those other spooky coincidences? Well, they don't really hold up when you look closer. For example, sealed tombs can have some nasty, toxic molds that can make you really sick. And remember, this was before antibiotics. A simple insect bite getting infected, that could absolutely be a death sentence. As for the power cut in Cairo, that was happening all the time back in the 20s. And the dog? Once you do the math with the time zones, turns out it died 4 hours after Carnarvon, not at the same instant.
But look, here's the real nail in the coffin for the curse. If it was real, who's the one person who should have been victim number one? Howard Carter, right? The guy who actually broke the seal? He lived for another 16 years. Lady Evelyn, one of the first people inside, lived to be 78. And Dr. Derry, the guy who did the autopsy on the mummy itself, he lived to the ripe old age of 87. The people who were most exposed to this curse were the ones who lived the longest.
So, there you have it. The curse was basically a media sensation, built on a few coincidences and a lack of modern science. But if we peel away all that myth, we're left with a story that's, honestly, even more profound.
You know, the ancient Egyptians had this belief. They said that true death only really happens when your name is spoken for the last time. As long as you're remembered, you live forever. That was the real goal for any pharaoh.
And that's the ultimate irony of this whole thing. Tutankhamun was this forgotten, insignificant boy king that his own successors tried to wipe from history. For 3,000 years, his name was basically silent. But the discovery of his tomb and the wild curse story that came with it made his name famous in every single corner of the world.
So in the end, maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. The story was always framed as a curse that brought death to those who disturbed the king's peace. But by doing that, it guaranteed that millions upon millions of people would speak his name and study his life and look at his incredible treasures. In a way, Howard Carter didn't just give the world a tomb. He gave a long-forgotten king the one thing he always wanted: immortality.